Hey guys, welcome to my first YouTube video. So for today, I'm gonna be reading Deepest Despair, and it's a bkdk, and it's a soulmate UA. So this story does contain some self-harm. It contains self-harm, suicide attempts, anxiety, depression, alcohol abuse, and it mentions a bit of blood. So if you're not comfortable to any of that, just don't listen to it, because it does mention those quite a bit. But I'm going to be reading chapter 1 for today, and then we'll see how it goes. I'll be trying to post every week, but we'll see how that goes. But let's get started. Chapter 1. Izuku Midoriya, a 16-year-old teen attending his second year at UA High School in Masufu, Japan. UA was Izuku's dream school, so you would expect that he'd be thrilled that he got in. Well, at first he was. It was when year 2 began rolling around that Izuku's world got turned upside down. His father, who he had never actually met, he had only heard about him from his mother, who had always seemed hesitant to talk about him to Izuku. The first things he had got out of her from childhood was that his name was Hashui, and he was at a work post aboard. Once he came home, Izuku learned a lot of information about his father he would have never assumed before. 1. His father was actually a well-known pro hero named Fire Fury. 2. He was a massive alcoholic, not to mention an abuser, and a sadistic human being. He beat both Izuku and Inko, abused them near death. It had gotten so bad that Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother, had become better friends with drugs and alcohol than her own son. She stays in her room at all times, and the only time Izuku would see her would either be when he would check on her to make sure she wasn't dead, or during a fight with his father. He protected his mother as much as he could, but he was too afraid to use his quirk on his dad, so it's not like he put much up of a fight against him. That doesn't mean he hadn't got his father to back down or stop. He stopped when Izuku called the police, but at the point the police wouldn't even bother to come to their house, let alone pick up the phone. He also stopped if he felt tired or bored with them. His Zashui Midoriya is an awful man. He both mentally and physically hurt both Inko and Izuku until they were either sobbing messes or bloody masses on the floor. Inko was also a normal smoker and self-harmed herself often, but not nearly as often as her son. Izuku wasn't even subtitled like his old self. He had been beaten down so many times that he barely had the will to get off the bed, let alone meet his father's face in the morning. One thing that Izuku had endless energy for was cutting. He loved the feeling of relief when he cut deep into his forearm with a razor. He loved watching his deep red blood ooze out of the cut and drip down his hand and into the sink. He loved the now numb pain he felt during it. And he lived more than anything the ache it left there for hours. It would be easy to just call him depressed and call it a day, and that's usually what people would assume when first glancing at him, but it runs so much deeper than that. His father had given him mental scars that would stick with him for life. Tuesday, 4 days before Izuku's birthday. Before school, Izuku carefully slid out of the small home, dusting aside the broken glass. Izuku carefully slid out of the small home, dusting aside the broken glass that still littered the floor from his father late night drinking and lashing out, and silently shutting the door behind himself. After a few seconds, he let out a breath. After a few seconds, he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He quickly turned around and sluggishly began his walk towards his school. He had a fear of making a lot of noises while walking, so he purposely avoided the grave path and chose to walk on the slight damp grass instead. The act was ignored by many, but if someone would pay enough attention, they would tell how skittish the boy was when he made any noise. The green net subconsciously rubbed his jawline, wincing as he felt the slightly covered up bruise that was there. Last night, Inko and Hizashi got into a fight. Who knows at this point what it could have been about? Hizashi at this point would try and find any little detail to fight about with her. Inko is a fragile woman, thin and timid, not one to ever fight back against her husband. So of course Izuku stepped in, shielding his mother from his father and trying his best to fight back. Hizashi was basically blackout drunk, so he wasn't the best fighter. But dang, did his hits hurt. Izuku winced once again. He slightly pulled up his collar, effectively covering up the bruise. Izuku sighed, rubbing the bandages on his wrist. 4 more days. 4 more days until Izuku was going to have a mark there. 4 more days until he would have a clue to see who might just be able to take part in helping Izuku out of the hell he calls home life. That always slightly cheered him up and takes slightly with a grain of salt. Because little to nothing made Izuku feel anything but cold. Of course, Izuku had good days. That was a terrible part of this cycle called life, too. One day Izuku would feel fine. I guess some people would call it happy, but Izuku was smart enough to know happy was just a chemical reaction, and Izuku wasn't good at chemistry. Not at all. The next day he would feel empty again, cold. It was a dark circle of good days and bad days, and at this point Izuku barely even took into account when he was feeling better. He already knew that it was useless to think he was getting better, and never actually stayed for long. Yue was now one of Izuku's only escape from his father. Ever since Hizashi had forced the school to allow Izuku to move out of the dorms, his face had been a daily scene. And these fights were getting more and more frequent. Izuku wished nothing more than to not have to see his father, to be able to tell someone what was happening. But Izuku had it ingrained into his head that he could tell no one what happened at his home. Hizashi had pounded into Izuku's skull that no one would believe, no one would care. That at this point Izuku thought it too. People always say not to believe what a manipulator says to you, but it's not that easy. Everyone acts like it's so easy to tell when someone's in the wrong. That it's easy to tell that you're not in the blame for you are abused. But it's not that simple. Hizashi is a terrifying, amazing manipulator that Izuku actually believed what he said. He thought everything he thought and really thought no one would listen to him. Izuku carefully made his way up the last few steps up to Yue's large front doors, making as little noise as possible as he slightly opens the door and Izuku carefully made his way up the last few steps up to Yue's large front doors, making as little noise as possible. As he slightly pulled open the door and slipped his body inside. Immediately after he got inside and started walking, he heard a Pacific brunette call his name. Deku! Ow! Sorry! Deku! The clumsy girl had walked into someone while trying to get his attention, but quickly recovered and bounced over to the greenette. Deku! Hey, how are you? She paused, glaring thoughtfully at Izuku's jaw. Deku, what happened? What's that? She whispered while pointing at his face. Izuku didn't even want to touch his face. Izuku didn't even have to touch his face to know what she was talking about. Oh, Araka, I slipped on my way home yesterday and fell. Hit my jaw. He answered quietly, clenching harder onto his backpack straps. Uraka contemplated his answer for a few seconds before shaking her head. If you fell on your way home, Bakugo would have been laughing about it this morning. He's been quiet. He's been all quiet today. It's eerie, she pointed out, her eyebrow getting scrunched up in thought. Well, Kachan, he walked home before me. He didn't see me, Izuku concluded, which wasn't actually wrong. Kosuke had actually walked home before Izuku, ended up being way ahead of him before Izuku even got into the path they both take. Oh, okay, Uraraka nodded, giving Izuku a bright grin. Anyways, she slightly pushed Izuku forward in a playful way. Isn't your birthday Saturday? She quickly walked next to Izuku, matching his pace as they began their short walk to 2A. Izuku gave a slight nod, keeping his eyes locked on the people Izuku gave a slight nod, keeping his eyes locked on the people around him shoes. So we have to do something special for you. I mean, it's your 17th birthday. You are finally going to get your mark, she excitedly yapped, clapping her hands together. Izuku glanced up at her, and unsurprised when he found her having a far away look in her eyes, probably already thinking over all the fun activities they could do on his birthday. Aren't you excited you're going to have a mark? Think of how cool it's going to be. Just thinking. Aren't you excited you're going to have a mark? Think of how cool it's going to be. Just think about it. She lightly grabbed his arm, causing Izuku to immediately tense up and lock eyes with her hands. She carefully slides his sleeve up a bit, unexpectedly finding a layer of bandages. She looked up at him in confusion, pointing at the wraps around his arms. What's this? What happened? She asked, giving him a What's this? What happened? She asked, giving him a sympathetic glance. At this moment, Izuku was extremely glad he took the time to replace the wrap this morning, or else it would have already shown signs of dried blood. It's just from training. It's from training, he weakly stated, trying to play it off as normal. She let go of his arm and tried to meet his eyes, but failed since Izuku was once again glaring daggers at his shoes. Hey Deku, I've been wondering lately, she began hesitantly, but was cut off when Izuku quickly slipped inside the door to their classroom. The unspoken message already told, I don't want to talk about it. It's not like Uraraka hasn't tried to talk to Izuku about this. He just never did. Whenever she tried to bring it up, he immediately changed the subject. Not to mention, he also avoided people at all cost. Uraraka didn't really talk to him often anymore. Uraka didn't really talk to him very often anymore. She tried so many times to talk to him more and more, but he either wouldn't answer and would give some lame excuse that he wasn't really feeling his best or had a headache. He was always so polite about it, so she always dropped it. That doesn't mean she didn't hang out with him. She would literally force him out of the house. She would literally force him out of his house to go do stuff with her, which he sometimes accepted and other times refused. She sighed and followed him inside immediately after her normal personality busted back to life. Hey, Sue! She exclaimed quickly before quickly running over to the said girl. Izuku just slumped into his seat behind Koski, head in his palms, subconsciously avoiding touching his large bruise. He carefully looked up, glancing at the blonde and his small group of friends. The only people he ever associated himself with was Kirishima and a deep red-haired boy with an attractive smile and oddly spiked teeth. Kaminari, a mustard yellow hair boy that had a random black lightning bolt on his bang. They were going off about something random that Koski didn't seem to care about. The only response they got from him was a grumble or an eye roll. Uraka was right. The blonde seemed to be more quiet today than normal. He was still in his normal sitting position. One Ida had scolded him for countless times, and at this point he had already given up at it. His legs were resting on his desk, and he was leaning back in his chair, head dipped back and eyes slightly closed, as he almost had his arms crossed against his chest. He also had his arms crossed around his chest. Izuku noticed he was staring, so he decided to just stare out the window, calmly watching the cherry blossom leaves flow around, swirling in the morning breeze before falling down to the gravel and being swept away into a pile that had begun to form at the front of the gates. It was a nice break from the normal life Izuku lived, just staring at the peaceful world and wondering what life could have been if he was born someone else. He took a couple deep breaths, closing his eyes and setting his head on top of the table in between his folded arms. Hey Baku bro, your birthday's Sunday, right? Any special plans? Izuku heard Kirishima ask from in front of him. He also heard Koski grumble and irritated. Yes to my birthday and no to plans. I don't do shit for birthdays. Fucking childish. And could basically feel the annoying glare he issued to the redhead. Wait, Bakugo, your birthday's Sunday? Uraka piped up, walking over to the group. What, are you deaf? What is it to you anyways? If you're gonna plan some dumb shit for it, I'm not going. What, are you deaf? What is it to you anyways? If you're gonna plan some dumb shit for it, I'm not going. Fuck that, Koski scoffed. Izuku slightly opened one of his eyes to watch the conversation. Gee, Izuku's birthday is Saturday. We could do a double birthday. She seemed to ignore Koski yell in disapproval and turned her attention to Kirishima. Right? She asked, shaking Kirishima's shoulder. Heck yeah, he agreed and looked around at the rest of the class that was already watching the conversation with mixed amount of interest. Y'all in? They both asked at the same time. Mina was first to answer, pumping her fist in the air and yelling, "Hell yeah," which got her a small scolding from Ida, but she seemed to ignore him and pay full attention on staring Koski down with evil eyes. Uraka whispered under her breath a quick, "Oh, he dead." Most of the class agreed, none with the same amount of excitement, but still substantially interested. Momo agreed to have it at her house, and such as they already had a place. They already had a place. The only problem is that neither of the birthday boys had agreed to it. Deku, please! You need to get out of your house every now and then. And your road keeps giving you bad luck. Like, damn, how many rocks could be on one street? Uraraka giggled, but then stared at Izuku with puppy eyes. Guys, Izuku started, but stopped once he saw everyone's eyes, including Koski, shoot toward him. He gulped, but continued. Kachan doesn't want to do it anyways. It's not a big deal. Uraraka cut him off right there, giving him a long, playful groan. But Deku, he never wants to do anything. He's like you, but worse. She paused for a second as Koski went to go yell at her that he was nothing like Izuku, but she cut him right off. Oh, hush. You are no better. Leaving the dorms, not going anywhere with a class. This is gonna be good. She flicked Koski on the forehead, and he practically tried biting her finger off. She yelped and jumped back into Sue's arms. Fuck that, he yelled, crossing his arms again and closing his eyes. Deku, Bakugo, y'all going. I'll make sure of it. Uraraka gave them both a devilish glare before nodding to Kirishima, who gladly smiled and clapped. It's final. Bakubro and Midoriya's birthday Saturday at 6 p.m. Well, shit.